Hello, my name is Victoria Malta, and tonight I'm going to talk about resources and services for people who have mental health diagnoses or people who are in crisis. And I'm going to share the services that help me. I happen to be a person living with a mental health diagnosis. I was diagnosed, I've lived with it for 40 years, and which is a long time. And I was diagnosed with something called schizoaffective disorder, which is, it's a thought disorder of schizophrenia and mood disorder of bipolar. And but I'm a lot more than just my diagnosis. I'm a person first, and some of the things that define me are I'm a mental health advocate, and I've testified at the legislature. I've marched in rallies for against stigma, and I've worked as a peer support specialist. And a peer support specialist is someone who supports other people with mental health issues, and can really relate to them in a very similar way that maybe social workers or psychiatrists can't really begin to understand. So I've worked at a number of different places that I'll be mentioning later on in the show. As well as that, I'm an author, I'm a wife, and I've been married for 32 years to someone who's in recovery from drugs and alcohol for 32 years. And I'm a friend. I have a couple of really wonderful friends that have been very supportive of me. And I'm a dog owner. I have a rescue dog. I want to talk about how important it is to be, when you have a mental health diagnosis, you can live in the community and you can live successfully if you take advantage of the resources that are out there. And a long time ago, people would just be put away in institutions, and they thought that was the answer, but that wasn't the answer. So they deinstitutionalized people, and then people thought that wasn't the answer because they saw a lot of homeless people or people in prison. Well, I'm here to say that if you take advantage of resources and services, you can be successful and you can live in the community. I want to mention that when I first developed symptoms, I was in my 20s. So like I said, it's been a long time. I'm pretty old by now. But I was very confused about what was going on with me, and it was really scary. And I was in crisis. At the time, I thought that I could just check myself into a locked ward of a hospital. But I'm here to say that for me personally, it didn't work. I was hospitalized inpatient only 3 times in my 20s. And they just were like holding tanks for me. They never had therapy groups. They never had, they were just places where people would just wander around. My first experience was in Florida at an inpatient ward, and it was traumatizing for me because I saw people for the first time that were scary looking to me. I'd never seen people act bizarre like that, and it was locked. I didn't know anything about being locked in. I didn't know that I never thought of myself as a dangerous person. All of a sudden, I was in a totally different type of place where I felt alone and scared. And when I moved back up to Connecticut, I was inpatient at Danbury Hospital, and that was a little better. They had therapy and things like that. But I would have to say that for me, the inpatient wards were just holding tanks. That was not where I got my recovery. I got my recovery in other places and other ways along the way. And so I made the decision in 1988 that I would never go back in the hospital again, in the locked ward. So in 1986, this was right around the time when I was first being diagnosed and having a lot of issues. I was living down in Florida, like I said, and I was in a place that was very traumatizing. So when they released me after 10 days, I was flown up to Connecticut to live with my mother and start attending a day hospital, which is through Danbury Hospital. And by this time, I wasn't really sure what to expect, but it turned out to be something very beneficial for me because it offered me community. I was around other people who could understand what I was going through. I didn't feel so alone. When they first gave me the diagnosis, to tell you the truth, I was relieved because I always thought, well, why can't I hold a job? Am I weak? Is something wrong with me? When they told me that I had a serious mental illness, I didn't know what the road ahead would be like, but I was ready. You know, I was ready to do whatever I had to do to get better. So so the day hospital was unlocked. You know, you could come and go. It was during the day, so my mother would come. I was in my 20s, and my mother would come and pick me up after it was over. This day hospital had meals where we cooked meals, and we had group therapy, and I got very close with some of the other people that were there, and I was there off and on for about 8 months. And so another thing I want to say is, you know, it did provide structure and routine, but also there was a therapist. You know, the therapy groups were run by licensed clinical social workers and APRNs, and I got to be very close with one of the therapists, and her name was Robin, and she was in her 50s. She had just graduated from Smith College as a social worker, and she kind of took me under her wing. And she saw that I had gifts other than just being a diagnosis, that I was a person, I was a gifted writer. She knew that I was a gifted writer because I wrote the newsletter at the day hospital. I wrote a lot of articles, and she was really believed in me. And so one day she came in with a brochure from Smith College, from the college that she went to, and she encouraged me to try to get my MFA in creative writing. And even though I never went on to do that, to get my MFA, it was the first person that I felt really for the first time saw that I had something to offer and that I had gifts. And so that was great, you know, for me. And so then I went on, years passed. My illness is chronic, so I have episodes. And sometimes I have to go to a day hospital for a tune-up because I need extra help and support. So I went to soon after I got married, I had another episode, and I went to a day hospital, and it was called an intensive outpatient program. And it was in New Haven. They had all kinds of groups. They had movement therapy, group therapy, relaxation therapy, art therapy. I mean, it was amazing. And I was there for about a month and a half. And again, I met another woman who was a APRN who worked there. And she created a tape for me on a meditation tape of nature sounds for me to listen to at night when I was having a hard time sleeping. And so this was another person. I found in my life that there have been people that have come into my life for a reason to guide me along and who believed in me and my recovery. So that was another person that was really helpful. Now, and the final thing, I was fine for a long period of time. I had a therapist for 20 years I stayed out of the hospital or the IOP or day hospital, but recently in the past year, I went back into another IOP. This one's in Hamden, and it was called Yale New Haven Adult Outpatient Psychiatric Services, which is in Hamden. And I think they have I'm sure they have a service in New Haven too. And so I went there for a month, and they had coping groups on how to cope with when you have symptoms and how to deal with things. And a lot of it was educational. You know, it wasn't anything about people telling their war stories or anything like that. It was pure coping techniques or coping mechanisms that we can use when we're in distress. So, and also at the time, they also have a psychiatrist that you would meet with for once a week too. Okay, another thing that's really important is that there are agencies that can help people who are really struggling with mental health issues too. One that I was involved with was BH Care, which is in Branford, and they offer housing options, therapy groups, case management. They have a club, they call it a social club. It's called Options. And I first want to say that it's really important for people, for their first step in recovery is for them to have housing. Because if you don't have a place to live, you can't really begin to recover. If you're on the street or if you're in a dangerous situation, if you're living with domestic violence, there's just no way that you're going to be able to work on getting better. So the main thing is these agencies can hook you up with, they have group homes, they have apartments that are affordable and safe for people to move to and live. And I wrote 10 letters to editors in 10 newspapers around Connecticut about how important that is for people to have a place to live first, that they feel safe. And that's how it was for me too. I lived in a halfway house for a couple of years off and on, and that's where I learned a lot of things. You know, I got a lot of support, and it was just a very positive experience for me. But anyway, BH Care is, they have offices in Branford, Ansonia, and Derby. And I was never a client of BH Care, but I was hired as a peer support specialist. I told you before what a peer support specialist is. And just to say on the side, in order to be a peer support specialist, you have to go take a rigorous exam at this place called Advocacy Unlimited, and you have to take this course, which goes for a number of months, and then you have to pass an exam, and so it's challenging. But if you pass, then you can get a job as a peer support specialist, and that's what I did. And some of the things that I did at Options were I ran advocacy groups, and we would go up to the Capitol. We would testify in front of legislators. At one point, there were some artists in the clubhouse, and the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services was having an art show, and I was able to get people to bring in their art and have it hung up on the walls of Demas. And and then another time there was a legislative breakfast that I held, and I had invited local legislators to come to the clubhouse, the social club, and meet with the people that were in their area, the people in the social club, and they asked a lot of questions of the legislators, and they were very respectful. It was a very positive, successful experience. So BH Care, my experience at Options was very positive, and and these agencies really do offer a lot. There was another one that I'm involved with now called Continuum of Care, which is in New Haven, and they offer similar things. They offer housing, case management therapy. I was a peer specialist there in 2016 and 17, and I worked with people in a house with people who had HIV, and I would meet with them and counsel them and listen to them, offer them support. I worked in 2 Section 8 housing buildings, and I worked with people who had mental health issues that lived in the buildings. And the main thing is I wanted to get people to get out of their apartments and to socialize. You know, it was very, very important for me to do that. And sometimes I would take them out on trips, like to the mall or something like that. Or at one of the other places that I worked at, all the people in the group home created a breakfast that they would have, and each person would make something for the breakfast, and then we would all sit around and eat the breakfast, and it was really a great experience. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is social clubs and clubhouses. Now, there's a difference between the two of them. The thing that they have in common is that they're both for people who have mental health issues, but they're different. Social clubs offer support groups, groups of interest like book discussion groups or spirituality groups or art groups, but clubhouses are different. The clubhouses are they're called clubhouses because they're based on the Fountain House model, which was a clubhouse in New York City. And it must have been about 50 or 60 years ago that they started this. And the whole premise of this clubhouse model was that staff and members work side by side together doing work-related activities. And some of the activities in the clubhouse involved cooking, if they were interested in that, clerical, if they wanted to put together a newsletter or do type up paperwork, and then there was maintenance, then there's working in a store. I mean, they're all related to what the person is interested in doing. And like I said, the whole premise of that is that the staff is not above the members, that they work side by side. And so like I said before, Options was more of a social club. That's what they called it. And so I'll just tell you that for about 5 years, from between 2017 and 2023, I was living in Maine, and I started going to a clubhouse there, and that was based on the clubhouse model, and I was a member there, and it was great. I was involved with the clerical aspect of it, and I worked on it for about 8 months doing newsletters and things like that. And so after a while I wanted to get a job, and they had people who the staff could support people and getting jobs to. And I ended up getting a job that I held for the rest of my time in Maine until we moved back to Connecticut. And I want to mention also that clubhouses and social clubs can be temporary or permanent places to stay. Like for some people, they want to stay at the clubhouses and social clubs indefinitely because their friends are there, they feel comfortable, they feel safe. They don't really have any desire to really get a job outside of the clubhouse, which is fine. Then there's some people that just maybe recently had an episode and they need to get back up on their feet again, and they just need to get the confidence back to, for a few months, maybe working in clerical and then go off and get a job of their own, and then they can just move on. So it really just depends on the person and what they want. So that's pretty much the difference between a social club and a clubhouse. There's also another place there's a place, so I mentioned options. There's another place in New Haven called Fellowship Place, which is, it's not the clubhouse model, but it's a place to socialize, and they have groups. They have a very strong art program for people who are artists and writers, and they also offer housing and educational opportunities. And so in that area, at that place, at Fellowship Place, I was both a client and at one time I was a peer support specialist too. And my job at Fellowship Place was to support people who were members of the club who had jobs and or who were going to school. And I had a caseload of people, and I would meet with them and give them encouragement and support. And some of the people who I worked with, one man was in his 60s, and he was getting his bachelor's degree, which I thought was amazing, that he wanted to go back to college at his age. And there were other people. There was another woman who was going back to school too, and there were people there was one person that was working as a home health aide. These clubhouses, social clubs, other places, they're very important. People feel like they belong there, that they can relate to people. There's a connection, and I think it's a good fit for a lot of different people. There's a nonprofit agency called NAMI, which is short for National Alliance on Mental Illness, and they're in Hartford. National Alliance for Mental Illness is around the country, but the one in Connecticut is in Hartford. And NAMI is great. They started out working with family members of people who have mental illness, because a lot of family members didn't have the support that they needed to talk to other people and get ideas about what to do and things like that. Mostly what it was based on families. And they still do have support groups for families, and they're called Family to Family. And they're very helpful for a lot of people, a lot of families. And I'm just speaking for Connecticut now. Now, I was employed at NAMI Connecticut for 3 years. I think what I want to say, though, before I get into that, is that NAMI Connecticut has support groups for people with mental health issues, too. And currently, there are 20 support groups a month that are being offered to people on Zoom. And these groups are great. These people are able to be listened to and talk about their issues in a safe and confidential place. And they also have groups that are that are geared toward diverse groups too. I think there's a group for Asian people. I think there's another group for Hispanic people and African American people. So they're all geared toward different people, and they're wonderful groups. Now, when I worked there probably about 20 years ago, and I worked there for about, like I said, for about 3 years. And I was the first person hired as the first openly hired person with mental health issues at NAMI Connecticut. And I was a program coordinator. I ran a program called In Our Own Voice. And I had to find speakers from around the state who would be willing to tell their stories to colleges, hospitals, mental health agencies. And when I was hired, my boss said, there's one thing I want you to do. I want you to create 130 presentations in 1 year to places all around Connecticut. So that was challenging. This was my first job working at a computer, having my own cubicle. I didn't know what a fax machine really did, or I really didn't know much about computers. I didn't even know what public policy was, which was a very important part of NAMI Connecticut too, because NAMI Connecticut does a lot of advocacy for people who need support. So anyway, I was able to reach the goal the first year of 130 presentations, and the evaluations that came in from these places were positive and encouraging. And we would have staff meetings, me and the other speakers, once a month, and we'd meet at each other's houses and have potluck dinners and have a chance to socialize and talk about our challenges. So it was really a wonderful experience for me. Unfortunately, because of my symptoms and things like that, I could only work part-time. So if I had been able to work full-time, I probably could have gotten a lot more accomplished, but I felt that I did get a lot done. And but I went to conferences in New Orleans and Washington, D.C. I was given an award, Leader in the Recovery Movement, and I was asked to be on the board of directors at NAMI Connecticut. It was a really good experience for me, and when I left the job after 3 years, the job was given to a good friend of mine, and he was the one that took over In Our Own Voice, which he's still doing to this day. His name is Don Fisher, and he's the one that also organizes all the support groups too. I don't know how many people know what warm lines are, but Connecticut started their first warm line in 2002. And a warm line is a phone line that people who are struggling or having issues or are lonely, they are able to access the warm line and have someone, a peer operator, listen to them and offer support. And they pretty much can develop relationships. They can call the warm line over and over if they have a favorite operator that they want to talk to on the warm line. It's a chance for them to feel listened to and validated. And that's really, really important, because I think for a lot of people who are struggling with mental health issues, a lot of them are marginalized, they're not listened to, maybe they're in a family where they're ostracized. There's no place for them to really be able to just talk to someone and be listened to. And a warm line isn't a hotline. It's not a crisis line like 911. It's just a place. It's a line where it's the one that I work on the warm line. So right currently, and I started working on it in 2023, and I actually worked on a warm line in Maine too for 3 years, which was a very different warm line because it was the only one in the state. But the one in Connecticut, there's more than one warm line, and if people want to access all the warm lines that are being offered in the state, they can call 211, which is info line, and they would give the caller a list of all the different warm lines that the person can access, and a lot of them are open at all different times. Like ours is from 5 to 10. It's every day of the week, 365 days a year, and we're always there. It helps so much because a lot of people are busy, going to therapy appointments or seeing their doctor, or they have things to do during the day, and then at night maybe they live alone and they feel lonely and they want someone to talk to, and they're isolating, and it can be a real lifesaver for these people to just have that connection and that dialogue. So what I want to say is that for me, it's given me tremendous purpose and meaning to be a warm line operator, and to remember that each person has a story. Each person should be treated with respect and dignity, and to be listened to. They're people first. They're not diagnoses. And I remember everything that these people tell me, and that's what a warm line operator should do, is to remember and treat that caller with dignity, and so I guess what I want to say is that my mental health impacts how I show up within the community. It makes me feel useful. And every time I'm about to start working on the warm line, I work on the weekends, which is a busy time. Sometimes I get 16 or 17 calls in one night, and it's just before I start my shift, I say a little prayer. Just please let me be useful, let me be kind, and let me be useful, and I feel this is the most meaningful job that I've ever had. But it's not just about me. It's about the fact that the warm line helps a lot of people who need someone to talk to. And I worked on the warm line in 2002 when it first started. I worked in Maine, and I'm working on it now, and it means so much to me also to be privy to a person's life, and just listen and be aware. I covered a lot of different aspects, resources, places where people can turn to get help. And like I said, it's a sign of strength, not weakness, to ask for help. And for me, it's nothing to be ashamed of to have a mental illness. It's a challenge, but it's, you know, I've lived with this for 40 years of my life, and I've had ups and downs with it, but I'm still here. And I wrote a book. I wrote a book about my life, the last 50 years of my life living with mental illness. It's called Lost Before I Could See, Navigating My Way Through Mental Illness. And like, I didn't write this book for it to be self-serving. I wrote this book because I wanted other people to have hope and to know that people with mental illness can live meaningful lives, that life is worth living, that hope is possible. I wrote that through self-awareness and support, I found growth and recovery. And so I'm at a place now in my life where I'm in a stable place. I'm living in a home in East Haven with my husband of 32 years and our dog, like I mentioned before. And I feel that I want to give back. I don't want to think of myself as a victim. There is stigma out there. Unfortunately, my own family marginalized me in many ways and stigmatized me, but it didn't stop me from living and developing myself. And I've finally gotten to the point where I know who I am. I'm proud of where I've come from, and if I can offer other people hope, like I've mentioned, I think people need to hear that, you know. And I also want people to know that things change all the time, and that if you're in a really dark place, that things pass, things change, and you can get past it. I want you to know that, because sometimes it feels like you're stuck in a hole. You're stuck in a dark hole and you'll never get out. If you hang in there, I guess for me, in my own experience, things change all the time, and never ever give up, and never ever feel that it's a sign of weakness to ask for help, because that's what helped me. And now I'm on the other side. I still receive help. You know, I have a therapist and a psychiatrist, but I'm at the point now where, at my age, I wanted to write this book, and I wanted to give back, and sir, I wanted to inspire people to live up to their potentials and see themselves as people first, not diagnoses. Thank you.